Hey, it's Azriel Lawless. And once again, you've fallen straight into Hella Vella, where we talk about all things Vella. And today we're going to talk to a Vella author who lives on the island of Cyprus. It is actually 10 o'clock in the morning here for me in the Pacific Northwest. And for Chad Hensley here, who is a prolific writer and a Vella writer, as well as a Kindle writer. It's about what time now?
8 o'clock at night. So the sun just went down.
Wow. So I'm sorry I interrupted your hey to everybody with my shtick. So go ahead and say hi, please.
Yeah, it's great to be on here. I've seen a number of these interviews, and it's a privilege to join an exclusive club that hopefully will keep growing. Just like the Vella Club.
It's so great. The Vella Writers Club, that is us, is really a great community of folks.
Yeah.
Almost from anywhere you tap in, it's a great community of folks to be around.
Yeah, I really haven't been able to believe it, just how interactive, how supportive, how encouraging everybody is. And just like we're all in it together. We're all going to succeed together, hopefully.
That's right. That's right. We're the vanguard, baby.
Yeah.
Here we are out here doing this and seeing trying to make America take a look at a different way to read. So, and on this show, I just want to show everybody what fascinating people are behind the words that they're reading on Vella. And you are one of those fascinating people, Chad, one of those fascinating people. So tell me, this is the first question I ask everyone.
Yeah.
When did you get started writing?
Yeah, so I have a funny story related to that. When I was in high school English, I think it was my junior year, my high school English teacher, Mrs. Morton, who is still living, she's still with us, she's retired now. But she had us do a short story assignment, and I wrote a short story, and she called me in. She was also a librarian. She called me into the library, into her office, and she said, "Where did you plagiarize that from?" And I was like, I didn't plagiarize it. Like, I just wrote it, And so she couldn't believe it. But she said, if you really wrote that, you should be a writer. You have a knack for it. You have a talent for it. So you should write. And so I would say that was kind of the start, but I did not start writing for publication until fairly recently. I wrote a lot through university and grad school. I have an English lit degree from the University of Oklahoma, but I studied counseling for my master's degree. And so did some writing there, but I mostly have written, nonfiction, professional writing, whether it's related to, research, counseling, or Christian topics until recently. And so had kind of went away completely from fiction writing. And Vella is what got me back into trying it out again.
I love it. I love it. I love these Vella stories. Like, look at your background. No wonder your Vellas are so compelling. Oh my God. So where did you learn about Vella first?
Yeah, because I was already a published Amazon author through my other books. I was one of the early notified people. And I looked at it and I kind of considered it. And I was like, yeah, that's not really what I'm doing right now. I write regular articles, usually nonfiction articles, dealing with religion, philosophy, other things, kind of cultural issues. And so I was just like, yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if that'll go anywhere. And so I heard about it, way back in the beginning before it launched, which I guess was about this time last year, maybe earlier, and kind of just set it aside. And then I think it was, around in the fall of last year, maybe September, October, there was another email that went out. And I had been listening to, like a lot of people, I listen to podcasts regularly. And I was listening to this author, and he was talking about the idea of engaging with culture. A lot of people will try to engage with culture by writing nonfiction, but he said, what we need is more people to engage with cultural issues and, things that are, significant issues that people are dealing with through fiction and through great works of art. And of course, I don't, pretend that I'm writing great works of art, but I thought, well, that's something I would really love to do. I think that would be really interesting to do. So I didn't know, if it would making money. I had not heard about the bonuses or not heard about any of those things. But I just heard that and I thought, it's quite an undertaking to write a full book. I know because I've written some books and I just didn't know if I could do that, just sit down and be disciplined enough with the other things I have going on in my life to write a full book. But I thought, well, I can write an episode a week or something like that doing this Vella model. And so I started writing it in, you'll probably ask, so I'll just go ahead and tell you, in November of last year. So I started writing in November, but I was only writing probably an episode every two weeks, maybe one a week at the max, and really not sharing it because I was trying to get up a few episodes. When you're writing slow like that, it takes a while to get. Right. And so it wasn't until like December that I actually started telling a few people, just people I knew, hey, I'm doing this, you want to check it out? But nobody was reading it, and so nobody was, I went all the way through November, December, and most of the way through January, and nobody was reading it because it was just a few friends.
Right.
And that's when I discovered the Vella community. And that was kind of like where I started the learning process of learning how to get your work out there and how to share it with others. And it's really taken off since then. We've had a lot of readers since then. So that makes it a lot more fun, and then you get good feedback from other Vella authors, which is really wonderful.
Right. It's what groups like Hella Vella are for,
Yeah.
Let's get together. Let's see if we can build this ark, baby, and float this thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So you started writing for your Vella and you were you kind of uploading it just as you went, or were you holding back your episodes in?
I think I wrote 3 at the beginning. Mm-hmm. I knew enough, like just looking and seeing what other people had done that I thought maybe it would be a good idea to have more than one.
Yeah.
So I think I wrote 3 before I published any. Right. And then after that, it was, like I said, every week or two into January.
Well, cool. So which one was the first one that you put up? I've got 2 of them here for you. Is that still current?
Yeah. Okay. So after it's over, and that came out of, like you said, I live in Cyprus. Because I've lived internationally outside the United States since 2000, I have a variety of friends and people I know all over the world. And so we all were impacted, by the COVID-19 pandemic. Right. We all dealt with it. I actually got stuck in the United States when I was trying to get somewhere else, and so like there's lots of things that go along with that. But I think especially because I was relating and still interacting with people living in countries all around the world, even if it was just electronically, I just felt like you were able to see the way it was impacting people. Not just, obviously it impacted people in different parts of the United States in different ways. You're in California, is that right?
No, I'm in the Seattle area.
Seattle. So yeah, sorry, I knew it was West Coast, but I didn't know where. But so different places had different responses and different impacts. But even as you went internationally, it was much greater. There was a much stronger impact. And so I started thinking about the way that had impacted people. And after it's over is it's an imagination of like, if some of the worst decisions that had been made during the pandemic continued, what could possibly happen and how it could even, in the long run, maybe even end up being worse than the horrible things we experienced with the virus. And so it's just imagining kind of a post-apocalyptic world where all these politicians who are trying to solve the problems keep making bad decisions, and it ends up going horribly, horribly wrong. And so we end up in this world. And so the opening chapter is actually starting in 2026, and it is looking back, and it's kind of like the main character is looking over this wasteland of all this horrible things that have happened. And then what we do is we immediately jump back and we kind of do some background 2020, 2023, but most of the story starts from 2023 and goes on. And so it's in our future. So hopefully it's not prophetic or we're not going to have this, but the story will kind of run from 2023 to that opening scene and there's actually a big surprise coming that will end with that opening scene. And there's going to be another book after this that's kind of like the sequel. So I haven't decided yet if it's going to be like season 2 or another book or whatever. But I've seen, lots of people doing cool ideas with those things. But that'll be, the first book will be done sometime this year. And then we'll start the second one before the end of the year.
So after it's over, right?
Yes.
Now you keep saying we, are you partnered up with somebody?
No, I'm just saying about the overall Vella community. I feel like we're in it together.
Right.
But no, it's, when I was saying we, I was mainly just talking about we all experiencing the trials and suffering of the last couple of years together. Right. Because I think we all were impacted in different ways. There wasn't anybody who didn't experience some form of loss or difficulty with.
No, oh yeah, happening. I must have just misheard you. I just thought you were saying we're coming out with the book and blah blah. And there's just been so many interesting things that have happened with Vella. I didn't want to miss anything. Like maybe you partnered with somebody that you met in an airport or something like that, whatever. I just don't want to miss anything. But this is fantastic. So I have to ask you, because I'm dying to know, what are you doing that is taking you all over the world like this? I love it.
Yeah. So when way back in the year 2000, I was working in Wichita, Kansas, and we took a trip to this part of the world, actually to Istanbul, Turkey. And I kind of looked at the status of what was going on in that city. You probably know Turkey is a Muslim country, or you might be aware of that.
Yes.
But we met some of the Christian people there, and I'm a Christian. I was involved with church work back in the States, and so looking at like the number of Christians and the level of Christian work that was going on in Turkey, my wife and I just felt led to kind of move to the other side of the world and help out with that. There were so few Christians, there were so few churches. We kind of just decided that, that's something we could do. We could live in a mega city like Istanbul, 18 million people, and we could, help in an area where there were very, very few churches, very, very few Christians. And so I lived there in Istanbul from 2000 to 2019.
Right.
And then in 2020, this is an interesting twist for your interview. In 2020, the Turkish government refused to let me enter the country. I was given a permanent entry ban, and I'm no longer allowed to enter the country of Turkey.
Now, what is that about?
Yeah, they started going after a number of, especially foreign Christians. There actually was an American pastor that was thrown in Turkish prison a few years ago. It is a national media story. And after that kind of went a different way, for the Turkish government. So they started going after a number of foreign Christians and just giving them entry bans. They say that you're, a threat in some way. So we not by our choice, kind of left our home and stayed in the US. And then we always say, and so that happened in January of 2020. So I say, like, I moved to limbo in January of 2020. And then in March, the rest of the world joined me, because of COVID.
Right. So when did you make the move to Cyprus?
Yeah, so we looked at deciding what we were going to do, if we wanted to stay in the United States or if we wanted to go back overseas. And we ultimately decided through some relational contacts, relationships that we had, people that we known in the past who had settled in Cyprus, to move here. So we moved here in January of last year, so January of 2021. So we've been in here a little over a year, maybe about 15 months.
How do you like it?
It's very different. Istanbul is a mega city, and I love that. That's not for everybody. I know some people don't like the huge city environment. So this area, it's nice. It's very much more of the island climate. I don't know if you've ever traveled to islands like Hawaii and stuff, but everybody's a little bit more laid back. They don't get so uptight. So it's actually, I never would have thought about this because I wasn't moving here to get and do more writing, but it's perfect for writing because the pace of life is just a little bit slower, and so you do have a little bit more gaps in your time. Like in Istanbul, I would often commute, an hour each way every day, so get up and leave your house at 8, arrive at 9, and then get off at 5 and, get home at 6 or more. And so here, I'm working at home a lot, and then I'm still, even if I go out, everything's really close. But the weather, of course, is beautiful. It's nice. It's, it's an island in the Mediterranean Sea. So there is that. So everybody jokes, like, oh yeah, you're really suffering. You ended up getting, having to leave Turkey, but you ended up there. So it is a nice place to live.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It really does. I've seen pictures of that part of the world, and it is quite beautiful. And it's really, really something to contemplate. The religious persecution at the level that you're talking about being so recent. Wow.
Yeah, we've been friends with people who've suffered much worse things during our time in Turkey, and so like we've seen a lot in the 20-something years we've been outside the United States. And I think, like, you never want to make light of anybody's suffering, but it does kind of put everything in perspective when you've seen people who really have suffered for their faith or for decisions that they make. Like, for example, one thing that's very, very common throughout the Muslim world is the idea of honor killings. And it's if especially a young woman does something that her family considers disgraceful, she can be put to death by her family, and they'll do it in such a way. They often will have somebody, a younger family member, like under the age of 18, commit the crime because they will not face the full charges of an adult. And so, people could have that happen, because, because of a religious issue. They could have it happen because, they were messing around with their boyfriend,
right?
Right. It could be lots of different things.
I've read about
but there's a lot of really cool, if you like, like to read international literature and international stories. There are some amazing authors from this part of the world who've written about those kind of stories. Now, they're not necessarily fun stories to read, but they're very real stories, and they're based on a lot of true stories. And so if our readers would be interested, the listeners would be interested in that, I could recommend some.
Wow. Well, I think everything you're saying is interesting. I'm kind of hanging on every word here, but let's get back to your Vellas. I want to know how many episodes you have in After It's Over.
Yeah, I think I have 28. I don't think they're all live. So I think we might be at 26 live.
Okay. And do you keep your episodes at roughly the same size?
I do want to keep them under a certain size, but I don't try to get and so I would say I shoot for like 1,000 to 2,200. Because I think like 2,500 and above, I would just rather make it for this format. I'd rather make it 2 chapters.
Right.
And so, but I very rarely will have one that's under 1,000. So it's usually around 1,000 to 1,800 would be kind of like the normal range.
Okay, cool. So you've got that's a big rubber band you can stretch there.
Yeah, because I feel like, like you kind of look at the chapter or the episode and see where it's going. And some of them, are moving the story forward, and they require more narrative. And so sometimes they turn a little bit longer. Whereas if you have like a sharp, punchy, dialogue-driven episode, those tend to go a little shorter, just because you're communicating a lot quickly using that format.
Right. Or hopefully you are, hopefully,
you're not losing people.
True. I hope that. I hope that for myself. So you had After It's Over up for a minute, and then you put up another one, which I noticed, and I'm going to have you name. What was the name of your second one?
Yeah, The Force of Magic. And so that was a direct result of my interaction with the Vella community, because one of the first feedbacks I got on After It's Over, when I started passing it around, I think everybody kind of liked the writing, and they liked the opening of it and kind of the setting. But I had several people say, "Oh, that's that's a tough topic. Like I don't know how people are going to respond to that. Like I don't know how, people, because people suffered a lot during the pandemic, and sometimes people, like, they would much rather read something that's really horrible but is not likely to happen to them personally, or not likely something that they would deal with.
Right.
So you can read some of our other author friends' writings, like Tirzah Hawkins or something, and it doesn't really, it's scary or whatever. It's a little unsettling. But I think some of the people said, writing about the pandemic, some people, it might be very emotional, or it might be very difficult for them to read it. And so I started thinking about that, and I was like, well, I love writing the story. It's an interesting story to write, but they're probably right. There probably is, it is something that would not appeal to everybody. And it's something that might, and it's a hard story to write, and sometimes to read about some of the horrible things that I've written that could happen or would happen. And so I started reading some.
Chad, I think it's important.
Yeah.
Right, too. It's very important. It's important for the people who are going through this now, that are going to be too young to remember how it worked.
Yeah, it's like recording this for the future.
Right, you are, and you're doing it in a fictional way so that you're not browbeating them with facts,
Yeah. And some of the, the early chapters especially are dealing with real life, real world events that happened. For example, the main character loses his mom to COVID and doesn't get to see her when she's in the hospital, which is something that happens to many, many people.
It certainly did. And even though people aren't ready to look at it now, I think it's very important that you wrote it.
So in reading a lot of the other authors and reading, I read, several fantasy stories that I thought, I loved fantasy as a kid. It's one of the things that I read as much as anything. I read a lot of Stephen King, read a lot of fantasy, but I just haven't read near as much as an adult. I've read some of the biggest things like the Harry Potter series, or things that have come out, but haven't done it much. And so by far the most recent fantasy I read was on Vella. And as I was reading it, I thought, wow, it'd really be fun to write a fantasy story. And then just the idea came to me of kind of like a little unique twist on two of my favorite things, which was, the fantasy stories of my childhood. And then when I was younger than that, even, I read a lot of comic books. And so the idea of, superheroes, and now, of course, like, superheroes are way more popular than they were back in the 70s and 80s when I was reading those comic books, because of the movies that have come out. And so I thought about, what if we had, the idea of like mutants in a fantasy world, some people who acquired some kind of powers or something while they were in this fantasy world, and then interacted with kind of like your classic fantasy magic setting, but with superhero-like powers. And wouldn't that be a fun idea to play around with? And I got to tell you, it's a blast to write that story. It's, because it's so many blending of things that I've loved to read about over the years.
Right.
Now to write the story, and to write characters who are kind of living those things out, it's really fun. So it's kind of like my guilty pleasure, like when I have to write a really tough chapter in the other one, I can go back and write, something that's a little more fun, even though, they deal with some serious things in there. But it's just a much more straightforward story, and it's fantastic. It's a fantasy story, so it's not grounded in the events of the day like the other one is. Right.
But it still looks awesome. And how many episodes do you have on that?
Yeah, so it actually passed after it's over. So I started writing that at the end of January, and I went and I wanted to kind of catch it up. So I started writing it, and I wrote, I think maybe 4 or 5 episodes in about 10 days. And then I went from that to writing 2 a week. And so I have settled on a release schedule where I had one new episode of After It's Over on Wednesdays, and then new episodes of The Force of Magic on Mondays and Fridays. So since I've passed After It's Over, I'm now going to 2 episodes a week for both stories. So that'll be starting next week. So you got them evened out, but so Force of Magic must have what, 30? It's actually a little more. It's 28 live. So yeah, I think so. We'll be at 26 live with After It's Over on Wednesday, and we're at 28 as of today. We had a new episode today for The Force of Magic.
And so your inspiration for this was, well, the impetus for you writing it was Vella, but your inspiration for this really comes from childhood.
Yeah, I mean, so of course, books that everybody who loved fantasy read, like The Lord of the Rings, but also the Shannara series by Terry Brooks was an early favorite. Right. And there's a great portal fantasy that I don't see a lot of people talk about anymore called Guardians of the Flame, Warriors, Guardians of the Flame. That was one of my favorites, all-time favorites. And you can still find it, but the author has passed away, and so like it's kind of disappeared into history.
Yeah, kind of like Ursula Le Guin. She's gone now, but oh my God, she really left a legacy, didn't she?
Yeah, and I've read a little bit of some of your things with your love of the witch figures in some of your stories. You've got to get to the stories on Marda in The Force of Magic, because she's my favorite character to write of all of it. She's kind of the old sorceress living in the woods character, which is a really fun, trope to write. Yeah,
that is a fun one. Just to think the main question is, do you put chicken feet on their hut or leave them without?
Yeah.
And while we're on that topic of what we like to read, we've now come to the portion of your interview where I put you on the spot and say, what Vellas do you read, Chad?
Yeah, I actually watched Tessa's interview earlier, because I was thinking, now I know I'd seen a couple of your interviews before, and I was like, I know she asked certain things, because there's ones I could pull out of my hat, like without thinking about it, and recommend. But there were a couple of them that I've read recently that are not as well known, and I wanted to highlight those specifically. So for my big gun, the one that people know, Dark by Tirzah Hawkins is really a really disturbingly fun, horror movie, kind of a post-apocalyptic movie or series.
Yeah,
story.
It reads like a movie, doesn't it?
Yeah, I can see it. You can see it in your head when you read it.
Yeah, Tirzah's good.
And so and so I've read a few of her things, but that's probably my favorite of the ones that I've read of her. But there's two that I started within the last few weeks. One last week. There's one called the Subter Nights, and Nights is spelled like a fantasy night, Subter Nights by Mac McIntyre. And if you like Neil Gaiman, like if you like to read any Neil Gaiman, I think you would like this story. It's a really interesting idea of kind of a world beneath a world, or a world that exists beside the world that we know, a fantasy world. And it kind of blends fantasy and technology and a little bit of the paranormal into that. But it's creative, and it's well written and creative, and I've enjoyed that so far. I've made it, quite a ways in it, but not to the end yet. But I can recommend that one. And the last one is a very new one. I think it only has like 6 episodes out, of which I've read, and it's called Mythic Trials. Ooh, okay. By Meg Wolf. And it's just really well written. It's again another blending of the paranormal and fantasy, and it kind of imagines this scenario where everybody's going to have compete in kind of an arena kind of thing. So it has a little bit of that Hunger Games or Maze Runner feel to it, but mixes a lot more of the paranormal in with it. So it's fantasy paranormal Hunger Games kind of scenario. But the writing especially stands out. It's just very well written.
Okay. Well, just like I'll be linking all of your Vellas and your books in the video description here, I'll also link your shout outs, of course. Yeah. Okay, so now that you have told us some great new stories to go out there and take a look at, Dark won't be new to me, but I've never heard of the Subter Nights or Mythic Trials. So I'm excited.
They're both fairly new, and they don't seem like they have a lot of traction yet. But I we have some. I'm a promoter, Tess. Some of us are pretty prolific promoters, but But I know, like you yourself, I think you promote other people a lot more than you promote your own stories.
Yes.
And some of our authors are like that. They are not as comfortable promoting their stories. And so I think it's great for us to step up and say, hey, this is a great story. More people should read it, even if they're not going to promote it.
Yeah, it's nice. It's great to get a little bit of love. It works out well for me. I like it because I don't like self-promotion. I never have. And so yeah. So yeah, if you want to read my stuff, you just go right on ahead. I want you to.
Happy with that.
I'm most definitely going to. I have not yet read, of course, either one of yours, Force of Magic, nor When It's Over. And
oh yeah, I should also mention, just because did you see the Vella Madness tournament that was lighting up? So Callie Jones, I think is her name, from the Caster's Court. She has a book called Caster's Court, or a Vella called Caster's Court. She did a tournament, a March Madness style Vella Madness tournament. And it started at the end of March and it ran for about 3 or 4 weeks. And 64 stories competed in this tournament. And so each round, like you would have stories going against other stories. And the authors promoted those stories. And the story that got the most votes from each matchup won and advanced. So I should mention the shout out to Callie, and I'll send you her stories link. But she is the one that, of her own volition, put this all together, organized it, ran it, and my story, after it's over, won. It was out of the 64 stories, it was the one that won the championship.
Wow, that's really cool. And I said I didn't know about it. Yes, I did. I just didn't understand the rules, what you guys were doing. So really, this was a contest not only of the story, wasn't just a story. It was about who can promote that sucker.
It really was more that, and I have to, I shared this with the people that I defeated in the final rounds.
All right, you other 63 people, listen up. Here it comes.
That I think I have an advantage because I have friends all over the world. So I have people who can vote in every time zone around the world. So you have, people like, I was probably ahead of most people by the time America was waking up, because I'm promoting it. And then before I go to bed, I put something up. And so I think that was kind of a little, an advantage that probably most people didn't have. Yeah,
that was what, yes, because I couldn't figure out, it was clear that you weren't really expected to read the thing. You're just expected to vote.
Yeah, I mean, the authors were really trying to get people to read, but the nature of these things, I will say that just from a personal standpoint, I had a lot of people who, like, I've known for a long time, who would have never given Vella a chance, like never, didn't understand it, but because of the competition, they actually read some of it, and a few of them have continued to read. And so it did have a practical advantage in drawing in some new readers. And I hope that's the case for everybody, who was involved in it.
I've been trying to think of something to do for Hella Vella that's like that. I've been, I talked to a couple other authors about doing true book clubs, like a ring of like 8 people. And then you close it, then you close the ring, and then you go around all 8 people and you have to read all 8 of those books. During a certain amount of time, but it's a big commitment. And I got to tell you, man, after I started putting my stuff out on Vella, I became pretty convinced that I didn't know any literate people at all.
Yeah, it is. Like, I think, like I wrote my first book, in 2020, like for publication. And I realized how few people read. Like readers read like crazy. You know who we are.
Yes.
And the readers, the people who are heavy readers, they read a lot, and they read like a ton of books. And that's who I am. I've always been like that. And I know a few people like that, But I had people who were like really good friends, that I thought, oh, yeah, they'll read my book or they'll what. And yeah, nothing,
Nothing.
yeah,
Nothing.
yeah.
And
And
then
a lot of people just don't read. They watch Netflix. That's it.
they just sit there. Oh man, that's one of them reading books. I don't know.
A lot of my friends at high school are like, when's the audiobook coming out? When's the audiobook coming out?
And that's something that I'm going to be exploring too. I'm going to be reading them, I believe, not just for myself, but for others.
Yeah.
I believe I'm going to actually make that part of my writing career, because I like to read stories. I like to read them out loud. So it's kind of, yeah.
I've always done that. Even when, we have 3 kids and they're big now. The baby's 17, the others are out of the home. And yeah, I read to my kids all the time, and and I would just make up stories for them. So even though I wasn't writing stories, there was probably several years in a row, almost every night I would make up a story for my kids, before bedtime. So yeah, I think it is important. And I think it is a great way to expand the audience. We listened to a lot of books. When I lived in Istanbul, I spent so much time on public transportation, buses and things. And I figured it out in the 19 years I lived there. I think I listened to 400 books, just because I was on, 2 hours a day, sometimes longer, public transportation. And so it was a great way to pass the time. Wow,
Chad, you have really been living a fascinating life. It's that's pretty cool. That's living pretty large, I know, like you said, you're in California, and I said, no, I'm in Seattle, because for me, it's a big difference. For you, it's yeah, same.
Well, I should have, I didn't, I think I read Pacific and I was like, oh, she's by the Pacific Coast.
Right. Pacific is just where
you're in Seattle, but you live in the city there?
No. Yeah. But I mean, for you, the world is so large. I'm just somewhere on the West Coast of the US. Yeah. That's good.
Well, that's the way most Americans look at the rest of the world.
Yeah,
exactly. As far as knowing where things are, because America is so big. It really is. It's just like we talked about the pandemic. We had as many different responses to the pandemic in America as almost the whole world did, because we had different states that were doing completely different things throughout it. We traveled some, and some places, very, very tight restrictions. Here on the island, we had pretty tight restrictions when we moved here. But I went to rural places in the Midwest, and it was like it never happened. It was you just saw nothing. And I think for the most part, they were okay, because I just don't think it was there. It just didn't spread into those communities. Because there's just not as much movement, and it eventually got everywhere. I think, especially with the Omicron and stuff, it's eventually gotten everywhere. But it was interesting to see that, the variants.
I believe everyone will eventually have it. I think it's.
We had it in January.
Yeah, did. I got a rough case of it in February, but I have asthma, and so it hit me pretty hard, and I still do not believe I am 100% recovered. And here it is, April 25th?
Almost the end.
Yeah. And and I was tested and diagnosed on February 15th. So it's a lingerer. It's got a lot of lingering ill effects, like just exhaustion. And I'm talking to the docs about it, because I just find it so hard to believe that I would still feel this tired and this run down after the disease. And I think one of my doctors said to me, we don't look at the recovery from COVID in terms of days. We look at it in terms of weeks and then months. Yeah.
We have 2 friends who had really strange sensory issues that are still going well after a year. One that a certain smell just makes them sick to their stomach, almost like when you're pregnant or something, or that just whenever they smell this certain kind of smell, they just immediately feel like they're going to throw up. And then another person who they can't, their taste is still messed up after a year and a half.
Yep. It does play hell with your sensory faculties. I have tinnitus and have had tinnitus for more than 20 years, that ringing in my ears.
Yeah.
COVID more than doubled the volume on that.
Wow.
And I had a lingual injury from a dentist visit where all of my tongue was numb for 2.5 years, the primary lingual nerve, and it had abated after 2.5, 3 years. It had abated to where I didn't notice it. COVID brought it back.
That's crazy.
Isn't that nuts?
And you got married during that time, right?
I got married during the end of that because I was like, I'm going to die. I need to go ahead and get married.
Well, congratulations on your wedding.
Well, thanks. I love the guy, and we've been together for a while, and we've been engaged for a long time. And we learned that there's probably such a thing, especially when you're living together, there's probably such a thing as too long of an engagement. Either do it or don't,
Yeah. You finally pulled the trigger.
We did, and it actually felt great. It feels good. We're very happy. So anyway, and thank you for that. I appreciate that. So the next thing I want to ask you is, if you had the keys to the kingdom, somebody came to you and handed them to you and said, go ahead there, Chad, fix Vella. Would you do anything to change it? What would you do? Give me 2 of your top things that you would do to change it for the better, if you have anything.
Yeah, I have a lot. But
and I'm very interested in hearing that, because you are definitely an international person.
Yeah, I mean, so I won't even mention that, because you would guess that would be, making it an international market would be,
no,
would be a huge step. Yeah.
No,
yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I'm running a Substack with my paid, my episodes behind a paywall on Substack. So international readers can access my stories that way.
Substack?
Substack. You've heard of Patreon?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, but it's just for writing. It's just a writing platform. Yeah. So if you look at my link tree that I sent to you, that's one of the links on there. You can see it. So that's kind of my way around that. Like, if I have international readers that want to read, they can subscribe to that and get access.
Cool. I love it.
But the big one, I think, would be, an all-you-can-read option, whether you fold it into Kindle Unlimited or in some way, or you make it as something that people could pay for. I know monetizing these things, that's the tricky part. Like, there's been a lot of discussions about, could Vella be on Kindle Unlimited? And it's always a question of, like, how do you work the token system and stuff? But the Kindle Unlimited market is huge. And I think a lot of them would jump in and start reading Vella's like crazy if that were an option. Even if it was maybe a step up, they pay $1 more a month, or something like that than what they're paying now. But I'm sure that's tricky to monetize. But I'm sure we could put you're a programmer, I think you could put some people who could work the algorithms and figure it out a way to make it make sense. But I think that would be a good one. The other one, which is mentioned before, I think by authors, is just the idea of some kind of author page where you can do some interaction. The first thing I think would be very simple for Amazon is just to allow an author page where you have some way to communicate with your readers and have your stories together. That would be not much different than what they do with author pages now. Be very simple. But I've seen some Vella authors, who have like a family crisis or a sickness, and they have to take time away from their writing. Right. And some of them even end up with like 1-star reviews because they missed their schedule. Like they had to go 2 weeks without publishing anything, and somebody didn't like that because the good thing is they had readers, because if they didn't have readers, they wouldn't care. But I've seen people get 1-star reviews because they had a crisis. So it'd be great if there was a way for authors to communicate, like through an author page or something like that. And if they had for interaction with the readers, that would be fun too. But I think the main thing is just a way to put all your books or Vellas together and then communicate things with your readers.
Yeah, I love that, Chad. That's perfect. And yeah, I went all big eyed because wow, I think I missed 3 weeks on all my cereals from being sick with the COVID. And
it's happens to everybody. I mean, because you run at a pace that's based on your normal life and normal schedule. And then something big happens or something happens, you can't really help it. I mean, you just got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. That's to me, from a computer standpoint, just from looking at it, from a user interface, from a common sense standpoint, you can see the author's name under the serial name on all of every time it's represented basically in Vella.
Yeah.
You'd think that sucker would be clickable to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And
even if it just brought up a list, like, a Vella search list or something like that, that would be the easiest, simplest solution. Yeah.
Well, I think those are definitely good suggestions, and definitely for reasons that I haven't yet heard. So that's pretty unique. And I hadn't yet heard anyone speak of an all-you-can-read option. But that's, again, it's a no-brainer. They have Kindle Unlimited, but I don't think they could be persuaded to bundle it into Kindle Unlimited. But I think, like you say, maybe put a premium on it. Like when you subscribe to Hulu, if you pay another $10, you can have, stars or whatever. I think they could add like another $5 on there for.
Yeah, or even just like when you go to buy coins, or pay $10 a month for unlimited reads or something like that. Heavy readers, I think wouldn't mind. I read quite a bit, and I go through quite a few coins. Mostly come across so many interesting authors, different stories. I've read so many kinds of stories that I never would have read, and it's really interesting. The creativity that you find, and for the most part, some really well-written stories, well-formulated stories. You occasionally have the ones that I don't know if you do this, but like I'm probably becoming known in our author community for Facebook messaging people typo corrections because I do that all the time. If I see any little thing, there's just something in me that the editor in me, I have to correct it. I would want somebody to do the same to me. So if they found any mistakes.
I do the same thing. I'm very careful when I'm very careful when I'm sending a message to make sure that it is clear. This is just a typo. I'm not making any suggestion about how you write your book. I'm just saying that, we spell for FUOR here, not FOR, or whatever.
I caught Des Sweet on her author notes. She was asking us to lick the screen instead of like the screen. So that was a great catch.
Hey man, knowing Des, I wouldn't be sure which one it was, right? I love Des Sweet, man. See, what else was I going to ask you? I'm just so fascinated by the life you live and the fact that you're, on an island in the Mediterranean while we're talking now. That just does it for me, it tickles the geekness in me. It's like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, the whole history of this part of the world is really interesting. I mean, the country I live in is North Cyprus, and it technically doesn't exist. There was a dispute between the Republic of Cyprus and Turkey in 1974, and this area has been held, and it's kind of under the surveillance of UN peacekeepers. And so it's a really weird place to live because it really doesn't exist. Like you can't, like I had to FedEx my taxes to the States, and you can't FedEx your taxes from here, because there's no real address here that is recognized internationally by the international community. And like with one of the companies that I work with, they use a Microsoft solution called Workday. If you've ever heard of, one of their office solutions, it's called Workday, but it's kind of their HR solution. And you're supposed to put your address in there. but my address doesn't exist, according to this industry standard software. So that's kind of a weird thing, just to live in a place that is not really recognized by the world.
How does Google, there's like Google World or Google, what's it called?
Yeah, I mean, so they mark things like this. If you search for North Cyprus in Google, you get lots of weird things because a lot of times the Republic of Cyprus or the Greek government wants to make a real strong point about the status of this area. And so they will write some pretty nasty things about this government and this illegally held territory that they would say, so it's kind of it's a really unique anomaly in the world. And we have down the center of the island, we have almost like a Berlin Wall type situation where you have a divided island and you have a UN peacekeeping zone between the two sides. And so as a foreigner, as an American, I can go to the south, I can go to the Republic of Cyprus. But the people, for the most part, it's hard to get across for some of the people. But it's kind of it's much more peaceful than what you would imagine East and West Berlin. But it is kind of the same kind of situation in that there is a divided island. And the town I live in is divided between two halves.
Wow. So you said one of the companies you work with, are you still doing work in the ministry?
Yeah, we, of course, we're still connected. Like we have a lot of friends in Turkey and we're very close. We're just, just across the sea. Like actually on a clear day, you can still see the coastline. And so we're still doing some things. I do some online stuff and some social media. And I actually do some book publishing and distribution. Not books that I write, but I have a bookstore and a book publishing and distribution company in Istanbul that I still own, even though I can't go there. So that's kind of a funny thing. But it's all Turkish books. It's not books in English. It's books written in the Turkish language. So I speak Turkish. I speak fluent Turkish from living there.
Right, almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about the people there in Cyprus? Do they speak Turkish?
Yeah, the English is much more common here. The history of Cyprus is it used to be a British protectorate under the British Empire. And so English is very, very common. And in this north part, probably about 10% of the population are native English speakers. Either they're students who are studying here, or they're British people who live here. There's a lot of British people who live here. And then the people, and because there's so many of them, a lot of the nationals, the Turks and others that live here speak English because they need to for business and trade and things like that. But there's a lot of universities. There's about 100,000 university students that live in the three major cities here studying at universities.
But I was asking about Turkish. Can you speak Turkish there in Cyprus? About what?
Yeah, everybody speaks Turkish.
Oh,
okay. That's the trade language. If you go out to a restaurant, menus in Turkish. They might have it in English, but it's always in Turkish.
Wow. Okay. See, that's awesome. I love that. So you're fluent in English and Turkish anymore?
Yeah. Have you traveled in this part of the world at all?
No, I have not. I would love to. I would definitely.
I recommend I don't know if you ever did cruise. I don't know if anybody wants to go on cruises anymore, but we did a cruise in the Mediterranean Sea. It was like amazing. Like we had done one in the Caribbean years and years ago, which was really nice. But the areas around the Mediterranean Sea here, Turkey, Italy, Spain, Greece, incredible places. So I highly recommend if you ever come to this part of the world, any of those areas are wonderful to visit.
Do one of the big cruises first.
Yeah, we did one that left out of Barcelona, and then it went to the island of Malta, and it went up the Italian coast, and we got to go to Naples and Rome and Florence.
Cool. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that was exactly the right one. I mean, those cities are amazing. We did it with another couple. So it was really fun. Just two couples doing it together and going on that. And each port we would go and have a different person being in charge of the day of where we're going to go, what we're going to do.
Wow. So you've got kids that are almost grown, and wow, you're living there in Cyprus. So do you have any new plans for any new Vellas? I mean, you've obviously got a mind that is absolutely stuffed full of resources there.
Yeah, I actually have a plan to finish 7 books in the next 2 to 3 years. And so both the books, the Vellas that you have, they're not standalone. So After It's Over is a 2-book series. And The Force of Magic is a part of a trilogy.
Nice.
And so I know the rhythms, like I know where all the books end, I know how they're going to end, and the major events, it's all plotted out. So those will all 5 of those will be done probably by the next 2 years, within the next 2 years. And then my ancestors are actually, I feel like they're very, very fascinating people. I have one set of ancestors that came from England in like the 1600s to America. So like 1630s, that early. And that's the Hensleys. The Hensleys came from England in that time. And then my dad's mom, her family immigrated from Germany right before World War I. So they actually they left after the war that was with Russia in the 1800s, and moved. And then both of those families were a part of the Oklahoma land run, and they were original pioneers and settlers who went out to land and made a dugout home and lived and survived. And so I've done a lot of research on them. So I want to write, I think it's going to be a historical fiction novel on a period of that history that I hope to release in the next 2 years as well.
That Wild West history right now is big.
Yeah.
Either to fictionalize it or to simply, write about it.
Yeah. So my claim to fame, connection to the Wild West, is my five greats grandfather was cousins with Jesse James.
Wow. That's pretty good.
And so I went to school with someone whose relative was the man who shot Jesse James.
Wow.
And so we had kind of a little funny joking rivalry about that when we were growing up.
Yeah, like a Lincoln and who was his shooter?
John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah. Like their descendants duking it out.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty awesome. I love it. And I can't wait to see what else you come up with. This is really cool. So what would you have to say to the folks who are just getting to know your work and just clicking on these links and going to your work? What would you like to say to them?
I lost you. I'm back now.
Oh, I'm right here. I just said.
So your question, what would I have to say
to your readers?
Yeah, I think what I want is to write something that's the best story I can write for your enjoyment. And I hope that there'll be interesting ideas included in the story that will make you think about things in life. Because I think everyone should pursue life and we're not meant to live a life that is a horrible, depressing, dark life. We're meant to live lives filled with joy. One of probably my favorite writer of all time is C.S. Lewis. And he, in a part of his biography, his autobiography, is called Surprised by Joy. And he talks about seeing the joy in the little things in life and how he learned to understand more about the world and about God just from seeing the little pleasures of life. And there's an amazing book that's one of the best books I've ever read that just came out, and it's called Truth and Beauty. And it's written by an author who is a longtime detective mystery author named Andrew Clavin. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. And he wrote this story about how the classical romantic poets helped him understand the teachings of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount better.
Oh,
And
wow.
he just talks about how you understand more about the world through art and through beauty. And so I think like that's something like, if I was ever gifted enough to do any of that in my writing, I would love to be able to communicate more about the world we live in using the form of writing.
Right. And I think you're doing that. I think you're doing that right now with your Vellas. I think there's been sort of a zeitgeist. You know, you watch them move across the face of the world. And I think we're in one now. And this is part of it. These new voices, there's a meaning to that, to having all these new voices out. And I think it's exciting that we have this platform to share it on. And so I'm going to be following you, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure as well. Thank you so much for having me.
A big old time difference, you know, and so I'm just glad to see you. I know you can't make most of our phone calls, but this is pretty neat. And it's been wonderful to talk to you and get to know you. And before we go, I want to say there are 2 more books that I'm aware of, right, that we didn't talk about, that are out there on Kindle right now. One of them is The Danger of Being Alone Together. Is that it? Yes, that looked really good. And so that's out.
So that is actually, so I write articles regularly.
Yes.
And last year I noticed that a lot of my articles revolved around a theme of like community and the way we interact with one another. And so this book is kind of like a longer form. I rewrote a lot of the articles in a longer form together around that theme.
I like that. And I love the title. It's great. And the next one was Seeing God for Who He Really Is. Yep. There we go.
Yeah. My daughter, this is my daughter's original painting that she did the artwork for the cover.
Wow.
And that book is pretty autobiographical. It's kind of, we went through a lot of crises, including the one that I shared about being, kicked out of our, our country, our home. My wife suffered a severe stroke before that, and was in the hospital for almost a month, had emergency brain surgery. And so it's just kind of the story of like how we navigated those things, and how we feel like we grew to know and understand God better, even through the, dealing with the challenges and of suffering of some of those things.
Wow. And how's your wife now? Is she?
She's doing really well. Yeah. The part of the brain that was impacted by her stroke is the part that maintains balance. Oh. And so even though she ran like a 10K 4 days before she had her stroke, when she woke up in ICU after surgery, she couldn't walk because she had the balance of like a newborn, a toddler. And so she basically had to relearn to walk again. And then she had to deal with a lot of the struggles that comes from brain surgery. And, it's a long story, but she's doing very, very well now. She still has some limitations and still things that she'll live with, but made a remarkable recovery. So that was in 2018. So it's 4 years ago.
I'm happy to hear she's making or has made a remarkable recovery and continues to be well. That's nice. That's good to hear. And yeah, the trials of life will definitely reset the old vantage point, won't it?
Yeah. Gives perspective.
Certainly is. And I am really excited that you are bringing your varied experiences and your perspective to the world of fiction in Kindle Vella. And I look forward to watching your readership grow out here and seeing what else you're going to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that.
Well, you bet. And this is Azriel Lawless, and I've been here today chatting with Chad Hensley, who is of course, a Vella author. So be sure and click the links in the description there to go out to his work and also to the shout outs he's made on the show. So thanks very much, you guys. We'll see you.